Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to have this conversation. I know that there's a lot happening right now in the Philippines and with the election. We're really honored to have your voices. And I'd like to start off by asking you all to introduce yourselves. Can we start with you, Luis?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and Arjan and Loida. I am a writer, a poet, a playwright, and an adjunct professor at New York University. I'm also a graduate of Ateneo de Manila, where Arjan is a professor of political science. I've been with Loida active in the anti-martial law movement in New York. So that's the long and short. Actually, this August, a theater group will be producing and staging my play, which was written just after the Marxists fled the Philippines, and it deals with the absurdities of martial law. And I will send the information once the details are finalized. And Arjan, you should fly over to New York.
Oh,
Okay.
sure. Thank
But
you.
yeah,
Thank you for the invite.
so that's the long and short of it.
Great, Loida.
Yes, thank you. My name is Loida Lewis, and I thank Luis for recommending me to be part of this. Is it a podcast? Well, anyway, thank you, Nancy, and I'm glad to meet you, Arjan. My at the present time, I am chairman of the Reginald F. Lewis Foundation. In the political side, I am a co-chair of the Global Filipinos for Lenny and Kiko. And ever since there was election of 2010, when our candidate Pinoy became president, we formed the U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance, and I'm still the chair of that. So in my other life, business life, I succeeded my husband as chair and CEO of a billion-dollar company, PLC Beatrice International Holdings, Inc. I ran it for 7 years and liquidated it, and now I'm retired. Thank you. I'm eager to talk about this past election in the Philippines. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Loida. Arjun?
Hello. So thank you for this invitation. So I'm Mr. Arjan Aguirre. I am an instructor at the Department of Political Science, not yet a professor. So I have, 2 master's degrees. One in political science. I got that from Ateneo de Manila. And then one in comparative politics. So I recently got that from the London School of Economics as a Chevening scholar. So I'm not just, an academic, but I'm also a researcher or a scholar. So I do research on the topics of social movements, electoral politics. And aside from that, I also handle consultancy work, in the Senate, civil society groups. And I used to be the head of the Ateneo Martial Law Museum from 2017 to 2019. So I'm here as an academic, and at the same time as as an observer of the past election or the recently concluded elections. So I'm happy to meet all of you, Ma'am Loida, Sir Luis, and yes, Ma'am Nancy. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Luis, do you think that you could start us off with some historical context for the current election?
Yes. Well, given that the apparent winner of the elections, and I say apparent because there are serious allegations that there was the possibility of a massive electoral cheating. It's basically the comeback of the Marcoses allied with the Dutertes. And as we know, the presumed presidential winner is the namesake of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. So he's more popularly known as Bongbong Marcos. Of course, a lot of us interpret the initials in a way that I cannot mention in camera. But he basically allied with the daughter of the current president, Rodrigo Duterte. So that resulted in a pretty strong alliance because it united the North, which is the Marcos bailiwick, with the South, Mindanao, which is the Duterte bailiwick. And initially, Sara Duterte was thinking of running for president. And the polls indicated at that point in time, if she had run, she would have probably gained the presidency, but she withdrew, and the Bongbong Marcos camp, basically, from what I understand, persuaded her to join his campaign. And so that boosted his poll numbers up. So he has claimed that the era of martial law, and Arjun can correct me if I'm wrong, was a golden age. They basically turned history upside down. So what was up then is down now, and what is down is up now. And he's not apologized for any of the abuses, for the plunder that the Marcos regime initiated over the course of their tenure from 65 to 86. They have not returned any of the monies. I mean, there have been lawsuits, and they basically have more lawsuits pending. They've also been found to owe the government and the Philippine state a load of money. So he and Sarah are basically, and this is what bothers me, and I think Loida mentioned this in one convocation we had, they're basically rewriting history so that the younger generation will not really know what occurred during the martial law era. In fact, that's one reason that they won, was because through social media, they flooded the different platforms with this massive doses of misinformation. And the voters, many of whom were not either born during the martial law years or were too young to remember the abuses and the excesses of that regime. And so they began to question documented history, because social media is really Wild West territory. There is really no accountability, and therefore, following the Nazi propaganda minister Goebbels saying, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And so for many of the younger voters who face a future of inequity, they kind of said, we need a strong person. And what the Marcoses and the Dutertes are promising, if it's true that there was a golden age, to bring that back. And so we basically saw a reversal of history, and therefore a return of the Marcoses allied with the current power brokers, the Dutertes. So that's basically what's happening now. And so moving forward, I think we're all concerned. What are the implications of their coming to power? And so I think we can begin with what we think the implications are. Maybe Arjan
Um,
can come in.
sure, please do.
So thank you for that, short yet meaningful summary of what is happening, nowadays in our country. I myself is also a bit bothered because in the academe we are so bothered in the sense that we are a bit at a loss or in disbelief. Well, in my case, I really could not believe that this is happening. Those things that I'm teaching in classroom, or those things that I'm highlighting in class, are obviously being threatened by some content in the TikTok universe or even in Twitter, Facebook. Now, um, for the implications, of this, recent event in the Philippines, this triumph, this electoral triumph of Marcos Jr., I think what will happen is that the effort to undermine or to go against the EDSA 1986 narrative will intensify. Expect that to happen. Because this has begun since 1986, right after they have left the country. Many of their believers still continued to vilify the Aquino family, go against the efforts of the first Aquino regime to reconstruct our country, restore democratic institutions and processes. But when I say intensify, with this new administration, I am very sure that the very first thing that they will do is to change the 1987 Constitution. So expect that to happen. In fact, the top senatorial candidate who won, Robin Padilla, is planning to file his first bill, and his first bill would be about that, changing the 1987 Constitution. So the question there is why? Why the first casualty? Why 1987 Constitution? Well, it's because that is one of the greatest legacies of the EDSA 1986 revolution. So please don't forget that when they restored the democratic institutions and processes, they put all of those things, the principles, the institutions, the practices. They limited the power of the executive branch. They all did that in the 1987 Constitution. So our Constitution, in fact, is the living testament that what the first Marcos regime did, they're all wrong. I mean, they're all atrocious, horrible, and we are here to change those things. Now, with this new Marcos regime, expect that to happen. They will change the 1987 Constitution. They will get rid of those, provisions, or perhaps those lines that that imply that that the things that happened in the 1960s, 70s, 80s are horrible or atrocious. So again, that is the very first casualty, and of course the second, third, the things to follow. I'm very sure they're all connected to that. PCGG. We will no longer have commemoration of the death of former Senator Ninoy Aquino. No more EDSA celebration. I tell you, they all also began during the time of Duterte. This will continue and intensify for the second Marcos regime.
Why would this new Marcos administration go further than where Duterte? Why didn't Duterte do that when he came into power?
Susan, can I just interrupt the historical statement and very brief but solid statement of Luis,
Yes.
and the forward prediction of Arjan? I just want to say a few words on what happened in this election. That's why our group of concerned Filipinos in the United States and in Canada are telling the opposition, do not concede, because once you concede, you accept what happened in the Philippines in this election. As Luisa said, the brainwashing was so thorough with paid trolls that repeated these golden years of Marcoses and the exceptional ability of Bongbong Marcos, and that meaning to say a distorted history that was so massive, brainwashing. But aside from that, our group tried to explain, so maybe it was too late, but they were not satisfied with that brainwashing. The Marcos camp also was very blatant in massive vote buying. I mean, everyone will know how much money was spent in that region or in that town. So that's another one that is illegal, totally illegal. And then the last one is COMELEC itself being all 6 of them appointed by Duterte. And a Duterte crony, Dennis Uy, won the bid, I don't know how, to buy all the equipments for the election. So he had control on the machines, the voting machines. He had control over the ballots, and he had control for every other thing, the Marcos crony. So you put that all together, there was really no true voting. Why? Because within 2 hours, or even 1 hour, the closing of the precincts was 7 o'clock. By 8 o'clock, there were already 17 million votes counted. And it continued every 30 minutes to 1 o'clock. In 5 hours, 95% of the votes were counted, and the unbelievable ratio continued. Okay, as the ballots came in, 68% was Marcos, Bongbong, 32% Lenny, and it continued. It continued to statistically impossible ratio. So all of that together, we are saying that this election was fraudulent. And in fact, I will just for the readers to know, so what is this? An international body, International Observer Mission, sponsored by the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, reported, failure of an electronic voting machine, high level of blatant vote buying, red tagging included, and deadly violence. So they say the election does not meet the standard of free and fair. So that's the international. But we, who are reserving it from United States, talking to our own people, have known that. So I just want for you readers to know what happened in this election. In this election, there was no voting. It was already pre-programmed by the machine. Thank you.
If that was the case, is there any process to have that evaluated, or is this a done deal?
Well, there is an effort by NAMFREL to request COMELEC to allow them to do a manual voting and to compare the machine that they have. However, again here, COMELEC changed the rule in the election 2020, in election 2016 and 2019 for the 12 senators. When they were asking for verification, the choice of precincts was done by raffle, tombola. But for this one, COMELEC said, all right, this machine will choose, this machine will choose which precinct. And so lutong makauli, because the machine can be told, okay, this is what you will get. This is the precincts that you will choose. So this effort to verify is again controlled by COMELEC. So there is no real verification.
I think for the audience that doesn't know the meaning of Lutong Macau, it means it's basically a setup, a foregone conclusion, It's an interesting term, but that's what it means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What does that mean for future elections?
I'm pessimistic.
Yeah, I mean, if the Marcos Duterte camp push the boundaries even further, they will render future elections much, much more fraudulent basically, what will happen, as Arjun points out, is that the Marcos legacy of the martial law years, it's the same playbook, but now with social media and with much, much more money and experience from the past,
Mhm.
they will be able to instill all these different install all these different
Mhm.
mechanisms to make it easier for them to keep themselves in power. But I also wanted to point out that part of the problem is that it isn't just the Marcoses and the Dutertes. The political system in the Philippines is also dominated by political dynasties. And it's
Yeah.
not limited, as I said, to the Marxists and the Dutertes. So part of the blame lies in the fact that from 1986 on, while there was so called democratic space, the
Mhm.
different political powers, didn't really want to give up any of their privileges and their perks, and that's not, and that goes all across the country. So that's one huge problem. Now, one of the good things that Leni Robredo um, is doing, she's a co-sponsor of the anti-dynasty bill, which is sitting before Congress, but most likely will never be passed because the dynasty
Mhm.
sitting in power won't want that to be
Yeah.
passed. Okay, so that's a huge problem. So you have on the one hand the Marcos and Duterte currently going to be in power, and you have the other dynasties waiting for their turn. So in some ways, it's really the same old, same old. The feudal nature of Philippine politics is still very much in existence. It's just taken a new cast because of social media. I'm sure Arjun can, you know,
Mhm.
give us more details on that.
Can I just add to that? In the Constitution of 1986, there is precisely a prohibition for dynasties. But that's
Yeah.
1986, and it's now 2022, and Congress has never drafted a law until Leni Robredo, and it's still dead. I
Mhm.
mean, it has not moved.
Right.
So, well, to add, okay, and to highlight, this point of dynasty, this is also one of the factors why, we are witnessing this return of the second, Marcos entity in Malacanang. Because don't forget, Marcos is the most powerful dynasty nowadays. Most powerful because number one, they have ill-gotten wealth. And then number two, I mean, their influence is so spread across, all the government institutions in the country. So dynastic rule. In fact, this is one of the newest features of the second Marcos rule, or I call this neo-Marcosian rule. Okay, so before it was just a conjugal dictatorship. Now it's gonna be dynastic dictatorship because aside from Bongbong Marcos, his sister Amy Marcos, a senator, don't forget that these two also have sons, daughters. Sandro Marcos also won as congressman or member of the House of Representatives representing Ilocos. Amy has a son also who's sitting as governor. Now, their other relatives, they're in Leyte. They're all scattered across the country, and they're all in coalition with other dynasties like the Villars. Okay, this is so
Ano?
in fact. Yes, Cayetano. There's this recent study that shows that in the Philippines, the growth rate of the dynasties is 20 to 30% every election. Meaning every election, the dynastic rule grows by 20 to 30%. Okay, so it's really terrible that in these 2022 elections, people were hoping that with Bongbong Marcos being the president, we'll have a better Philippines. They would they would return us to the glory days of the people. No, in fact, they are returning us to the bad days of this country because look at the people who will sit in the government. Most of them, majority of them, they come from political dynasties.
Arjun, can you go back to how the first Marcos came to power and the formation of dynasties?
Okay, so thank you. Perhaps later, Mr. Luis and Ma'am Loida would add more to this. But again, it all began, in the 1960s. You have a very young, intelligent, brilliant lawyer from Ilocos. He became popular because of this, political squabbling in Ilocos Norte involving his dad. Okay, so he was just a student in the University of the Philippines, promising. In fact, it was alleged that he defended himself in the court, and of course eventually he also topped the bar, just like Ma'am Loida. So he became a senator eventually, young senator, and he contested powers with the usual politicians, popular politicians of that time. So technically speaking, he became a populist in the 1960s. Populist in the sense that he was articulating concerns of the general people. He was so concerned about his image, his messaging. He married a very good looking woman from Leyte. Everything was so let's say controversial about him. So when he became a senator, people were already looking at him as a promising politician, or presidential perhaps. Then in 1965, he became a president. That's the first term. The first term was a bit ordinary, meaning nothing extraordinary in the sense that he did not really do something good in our country. Ordinary in the sense that he just continued what was being done in our country following the term of the first Macapagal regime. Now, the second one was so controversial because that time, 65, okay, 69, and then 69 onwards, he was supposed to end this term, okay, in the 1970s. But he was sensing that, he wanted to stay more, he has so many, unfinished, things to be done. So the thing there is that this tempted him to to do something in our constitution, to do something with our institutions. And there you go. The declaration of martial law is the pinnacle of that. The declaration of martial law suspended the writ of habeas corpus. It closed down the legislature. So meaning the concentration of power happened during that time. And then don't forget, with this power, various families or dynasties that used to be excluded during the time of Marcos started to bow down to him. Okay, so these dynasties, okay, these powerful families, they started to to bow down, support him, and this allowed more power to concentrate to the Marcos family. So as you can see, this process has been going on for years, and then before he left for power, please note that Bongbong Marcos, Amy Marcos, the Romualdeses, they have already accumulated influence or clout. In fact, Bongbong Marcos, that's why I cannot believe that they're saying that they do not have any participation during the martial law regime, because during that time, Bongbong Marcos is already part of the Presidential Security Group. I mean, he's a second lieutenant, and Amy Marcos also was holding a position in the government. Imelda. So again, the dynastic rule, okay, the dynastic rule, though it did not directly come from the old or the past, parang dynastic trajectory that we always see. The growth itself of the power happened during the martial law era. So the Marcos dynasty was born during the time when the father was accumulating so much wealth and power. So again, their wealth, their clout, their power that they're enjoying nowadays, I mean, they are products of the first Marcos regime. So this was done through abuse of power, through human rights violations, through propaganda. If now we have social media, disinformation, during the time of the first Marcos regime, they're so into propaganda. Okay, the only difference was now we're using Twitter, Facebook. During that time, no, media was being controlled. So again, that is my contribution, and I hope Sir Luis and Ma'am Loida will add more.
Well, let me add before how this image making, this distortion of reality happened even with Marcos when he was a student. You remember that the father of Marcos was insulted, or more than insulted, or was humiliated when the Lanondasan won over his father as congressman, and the Lanondasan party carried coffin on around saying that the Marcos is dead. And so while Lanondasan was brushing his teeth, you brush your teeth on the open window, bang, dead. And Marcos then was a sharpshooter. He was convicted in the court of first instance. Now it's called Regional Trial Court. Okay, he went to jail, convicted, and he appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And while he was in prison, he passed the bar. Yes, he was a bar top notcher, and he argued his own case in front of the Supreme Court. And Laurel acquitted him on a technicality. So that's the first, sort of like stroke of luck. And then as he continued during World War II, he claimed that he had 21 medals, the most decorated hero. That's again another lie. 17 of those medals were given to him in one day because he was just, campaigning for it. So again, that's another lie. And then when he married, yes, the beautiful Imelda Marcos, he had the book at the time that he was running for president against Macapagal. He had this book and a movie, For Every Tear a Victory, and all false, story of the Macapagal, so of the Marcoses. So the constant rewriting and false history continues now, up to now. So that is the image making that the Marcos family has been very successful in hoodwinking the Filipino people, and it's happened in this election also.
Yeah, also just to add to that, there really is no genuine political ideology. The political parties in the Philippines are really built around personal affiliations. So it's easy. You have candidates who switch back and forth. It's like, taking the R train to switch to the Q train. Um, and in this last elections, you had basically like 10 parties, 10 different candidates. So there's no ideology that dominates the political scene. It's really which family are you allied with? Which region are you from? So it's really deeply rooted. And, of course, if you look at the legacies of a colonialism and the way that the United States ruled the Philippines on the one hand, and maybe this is going a little bit too far back, but it's important to understand that the roots of the dynasties can be traced to the fact that when the United States took over, on the surface, they promised a democratic rule, but they basically had the ruling families and they treated them and saying, listen, if you work with us, we'll let you continue on, which is the same thing that the Spanish did with the datus, the ruling chieftains of the different regions. So it's a endemic problem that stretches back to, at least the American colonial occupation. And as Loida was pointing out, Marcos was, I mean, it's too bad he was twisted, but he was a brilliant manipulator. If he had used his brilliance for good, he could have really accomplished something. But again, personal ambition basically took over. And so he, as Arjun was pointing out, he really laid the genesis of the spread of the political dynastic flourishing, you know. And what he did was really interesting. He said, I'm going to get rid of the old order, which sounded good, but he just replaced the old order with a new order, meaning his own people. Okay, so he went after entrenched families like the Lopez's. And the Duterte basically did the same thing when he basically refused to renew the license of ABS-CBN. So there's always been this struggle between the different dynasties, and it's like a shooting war. Who gets wounded in a shooting war? The civilians. So, you have the master saying, okay, maybe we should go with that fighting cock. It's like a cockfight. Sa pula, sa puti, and every time a strong man will emerge and projects this aura of, yes, I will lift the country out of misery, trust me. And you see this globally, by the way. You have, of course, Trump, you have Orban, you have Putin, Xi Jinping. So it seems to be something that is not just in the Philippines, but it seems to be this fever in the global atmosphere, you know.
That article that you sent me, Luis, the analysis by Walden Bello, there was a point where he talked about, the disenchantment of the younger working class, and that nobody is representing their needs. So do you think that there is a desire for an ideological candidate, or do you think that the Philippines is happy having strong personalities dictate who their next president is?
Could I just answer that in the sense that the reason why I and many of us were very excited with Leni Robredo, because her philosophy, her system is to uplift the disadvantaged, the unprotected, the powerless. And it's not just saying it, because she has done it all her life, ever since she became a lawyer. She did not go to San Miguel or Accra, the big law firms. She stayed with the poor. She became a public defender, and after she left that, she was with a nonprofit, always after championing the farmers or the fishermen or the indigenous people. She was able to win the case for the indigenous people whose land was land grabbed in Mindanao and walked all the way to Manila on foot. And so, I was so hopeful that, with a presidency of Leni Robredo, she could really help our underclass. We are 40%, on the poverty level. So, so your question is, do the people really know our people can be distracted by, yes, a strong man, a figure on Facebook or on social media? That's not real. So it's sad to say.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., he likes to think of himself as a strong man, but he's far from being one. He's a knucklehead, you know. And the power behind him will really be Sara Duterte. She's tough, she's a veteran politician, and Imelda is there. This is Imelda's chance to claim, hey, we're back. We can rehabilitate our image. So what will happen, the way I see it, will be Bongbong will be a figurehead. It's kind of like Bush and Cheney, the first term of Bush. Cheney was the power behind the presidency. And you can bet Sara, the Duterte, and Imelda will be the ones basically telling Bongbong, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. So, but I would also like to add with Leni, I'd like to point out that when she came to the States for her daughter's graduation at NYU, where I teach, She took the economy flight on Korean Airlines. Now, if you had seen this documentary, The Kingmaker, there's one scene in that where you had Bongbong Marcos talking to a friend, and this is on camera, telling the friend, could you lend me enough money? I want to fly to the Philippines on first class. I refuse to fly on economy. And I was like thinking, this guy cannot stand being seated with ordinary Filipinos, you know. And here he is claiming to speak on behalf of the masses. So his image of a strongman is really built on sand. You know, he's a weak person. Okay, so we can see a vacuum, and you can bet that nature and politics hate vacuums, and you will have the Duterte. And after a while, there one maybe good thing is that there'll be infighting, and this is where Lenny, and she's pretty savvy. As long as she holds her ground and she keeps with Angat Buhay, which is what the livelihood project Loida was referring to, she keeps a steady hand on the till, she will emerge as really even better positioned, hopefully, for the next round, because she's still young. And, I mean, Loida, maybe you can tell us what she plans to do.
Well, you have said it. Angat Buhay, she has been doing it. She's now launching Angat Buhay Foundation starting July 1 when she's no longer vice president. But instead of Imelda Marcos, for me, the power behind is Aimee. Aimee is her father's mind. It's not Bongbong, as you said, couldn't even pass UP, could not pass UPenn, University of Pennsylvania. He couldn't pass Oxford.
Oxford, yeah.
And they had to come out with a notice because the Oxford University in England has been bothered. So they came out and he does not have a degree from Oxford. He may have a diploma, but not a degree.
Yeah.
Arjun, did you want to say anything in this section?
Well, about this, appeal, this renewed interest toward the Marcoses. So if I may add, okay, so this can also be explained or connected to, this emergence of the new middle class. Okay, so this is, a phenomenon that is, going on or happening since the time when we had this economic growth under the second Aquino administration. So this new middle class is different from the middle class that has emerged in the 1990s, okay, under Ramos. So this new middle class is, tech savvy, more paranoid with their wealth. Okay, that's why they're so attached, or they're so connected, or they're so inclined to, this strong man narrative. So I am sure that the Marcoses saw this as an opportunity, okay, for them to rebrand, to rehabilitate their image. And yes, the Duterte has a role, okay, in this, effort of the Marcoses. That's why, the alignment was so smooth, okay, between these two dynasties. Duterte from Davao and then Marcoses from the north. They are all dynasties. They lost, power during the time of the first Aquino regime, Ramos regime. During the time of ERA, they kind of, gained some more. But again, during the time of Arroyo, the reformist, tendencies were very brief, because when she ran for president in 2004 and had this election fraud scandal, she was forced to align herself naman with the Marcoses, with the Stradas eventually, and went against the reformist groups. So to cut the long story short, these powerful dynasties, with their own interests, they align together, they coalesce because they have common, concerns. And again, they want to go back to power. The Duterte family, they want to be the center of power. Now that they are at the center, look what happened in the past 5 years or 6. They went up against the cronies, but they created their own cronies, just like the first Marcos regime. So they got rid of the Lopez's, ABS-CBN. They shut down ABS-CBN, but now they canonized SMNI. Okay, so they created their own TV network wherein they could bombard them with influencers or supporters. So again, the new middle class is also a factor. This is a new class of people. They have their own concerns. They have their own misgivings, shortcomings that they want to address, and they found Duterte as their own president, a political figure who can represent their concerns. And this second Marcos regime is just a continuation of this rebellion of the new middle class. So if I would just look at the support base of this second Marcos regime, yes, Sir Luis is right. The bulk of that really comes from Sara Duterte. So again, Marcos cannot claim that this 31 million is all about him. No, the bulk of that is Sara Duterte. The Duterte support base, eventually they sided with Marcos, because if Sara decided to run for president, I'm not sure Sara can win, even Marcos, because I think the reason why Sara also decided to slide down eventually is because she was advised by her handlers that if you will run as president, if you continue this course, you will eventually lose to an opposition figure. And I'm so sorry to tell you this, but that is Lenin Robredo. Okay, Lenin Robredo could have won this election, if Sara decided to run for president.
Arjun, can I ask you,
No.
with this incoming administration, will they continue the drug war that Duterte began?
Well, yes. To my mind, yes, because they need that. It's for optics. It's for capturing the fantasy of this new middle class. Because remember, this new middle class is so attracted to Duterte because of the promise that Duterte will stop or will address the problem of criminality and especially the drug problem. Now, the Marcos regime, I am sure, will also be tempted to continue the drug war, and that is only for optics. Okay? Meaning it has to appear that it is doing something. It has to appear that it's doing something. And to tell you honestly, the drug war for many of us here in the Philippines is still one of the greatest legacies of Duterte, because it is something that is concrete. The people really feel that there's something going on. They could see bodies. Imagine that. I really could not believe that, at this day and age, people would love to see dead people in the streets. As long as, these are addicts or, known criminals. So yeah, I'm inclined to say that, the Marcos regime will be tempted to continue the drug war.
They'll keep Leila de Lima still in prison?
I think so, because to tell you honestly, if this court case, or if Leila de Lima is released, that would also undermine the narrative of Duterte about the drug war, because obviously all of the accusations, all of the claims against Senator Leila de Lima are false. So if she will be released, that can also be used against the Duterte regime that your drug war is a joke. Okay.
Okay.
The problem there is that the three major witnesses against Leila de Lima have recanted, saying we lied. We were forced to accuse her of being a drug lord, and it's a lie. So what, are they going to come up with other prisoners and, force them to testify? Because right now, she should be released. There are no judges that will take her case since those who accused her have already recanted. But you are right. If she is out, then it's a judgment on the drug war of Duterte that is a total failure.
Loida, could you speak a little bit to the landscape here in America for Filipino Americans and how they relate to what's happening in the Philippines?
Well, I am happy to say that here in the Northeast, the consulate of Consul General Cato, Lenny Robredo won. And in Los Angeles, she won. But in the rest of the United States, Bongbong won. So the false history has been taken in by our people, even here in the United States. I am so glad that at least here in the United States, it's actual results. Whereas in Canada, they have this 68-32, 68%, 32% for Lenny ratio. And it happened there. And I was being told that the real ambassador of the Philippines to Canada has been taken out, removed before her term is even over. And so I would say that, over there in Canada, the results were copied with the same result produced by the machine of 68-32.
Was the ambassador recalled because she was anti-Marcos?
Well, because she was objective, meaning to say she's not going to make a lokohan. She's not going to, accept this machine that will give a result after people have voted. The percentage is similar to what happened in the Philippines. So, whereas here in the United States, I think the Consul General have seen to it that the votes are counted. In fact, it's already announced in the Philippines that Marcos won. We were still counting here in the United States. So to the extent that, all right, Marcos won, I can accept it. I can accept that he won, but not with this 31 million voting for Marcos and 16 million voting for Lenny. That's the number of people who voted for her for vice president. So you're saying nobody voted? I mean, it's just so impossible to have that kind of win for Marcos. Secondly, look at the votes taken by the #1 senator, Robin Padilla. It's lower than the president for the first time in our history, that the #1 senator has a lower vote than the president. Why? Because normally the #1 senator has a higher vote, since a voter can vote only for one president, but votes for 12 names. And the name of the #1 is usually on a ballot for one presidential candidate and another presidential. But for the first time, sinobrahan ng machine. Okay? 31 million is higher than the vote of #1 senator. So you can see, talagang lutong Macau, as I have said, and you know what that means now.
Yeah.
Arjun, can you speak a little bit to what's happening with the youth in the Philippines right now, with the younger generations? What's going on with it? Where do they stand in all of this politically? And also maybe on how social media played a role in this, and where the Philippines is going in terms of, I mean, here in the US, there are all these efforts to control misinformation and have balance on our platforms. Where is the Philippines at with that in light of this election?
Okay. So number one, so let me just say that the youth sector is not homogeneous. They're not monolithic, meaning you have diverse, interests, diverse, concerns, diverse, sensibilities, dispositions. And I have noticed that, this past decades, I have witnessed this, or I am observing, okay? I am observing this emerging new cleavage, okay? Cleavage among the youth in the sense that, these youth uh, uh, now has these new sources of their information because of the social media or the digital age, the cyberspace. So the traditional conventional institutions of our society, like academic institution, the church, family, they are now being targeted, they are now being undermined, they are now being threatened by these emerging digital cyberspace world. So the disinformation comes in to influence the very perception, the very worldview of a portion of the youth sector. So this portion, this group, I can assume they do not belong to the educated class of the youth, because I have noticed that the supporters of Bongbong Marcos, unfortunately, they come from this segment, this side of the youth sector. They do not belong to some of the best universities. They may have degrees, or they may be studying, but their teachers, they're not that well trained. Professors that have dubious background, Marcos apologies, apologies in the sense that they use TikTok materials, YouTube materials with conspiracy theories. So this has been going on for, I'm so sorry, decades. Okay, because as I have mentioned, and also Sir Luis and Ma'am Loida have mentioned earlier, the Marcos restoration, the rehabilitation has been going on since the 1990s. So I expect that apologists, their supporters, they're also doing their effort, in the classroom, in the workplace, in the cyberspace. It became intense. So again, this group of youth, this group of youth sector, people who were influenced by this disinformation operations in the media, I think we can say that they are the 2/3 of the youth, population nowadays. People who supported Leni Robredo, if you would look at their backgrounds, majority of them, they belong to the educated, class. Educated in the sense that they have, university degrees. They may be high school graduates there, but remember that they belong perhaps to a household who really values, education, or perhaps their respect toward institutions of the media, the church, etc. So the future, for the Philippines is kind of bleak, if you're going to ask me, in the sense that these voters, this bulk, 2/3 of the youth vote, 2/3 of the youth population who supported Bongbong Marcos, and who also supported Duterte, by the way, they will, constitute the next generation of adults. Next generation of adults who will have their own households in the future, will have their own children too. So this is going to be, a serious concern, especially for me, an academic, because my future students, I'm sure, will come from those households. Okay, who will have, a fantasy of a Marcos, a Marcos authoritarian rule. So yeah, it's gonna be difficult.
Okay, I am sorry, Nancy,
Yeah.
but with that, I sort of agree with Arjan. It's a very bleak prediction of our Philippines, but that's why we in the United States and Canada will remain adamant for true democracy. So with that, Luis, thank you again for inviting me,
Sure,
Nancy,
Loida.
and Professor Arjan. Salamat po. I have to go. I have another Zoom.
Take
Thank
care.
you, Loida.
Salamat, Loida. Okay. So,
Do you have any closing thoughts, Luis?
well, I agree in some sense that the future is bleak if we're looking at the immediate future. On the other hand, there is a glimmer of hope, and I stress the word glimmer because it's not, it's not this huge ray of light. And if Lenny Robredo can convert the pink movement into a political force, right now she has all these followers and she's the leader. So the question going forward is, what will she do to transform this force into something that can be a power broker and to change the political landscape in the Philippines? It's going to be difficult, but it's possible. And then, secondly, there most probably will be infighting between the Marcoses and the Dutertes in terms of the spoils of winning. And that is a wedge that Robredo and the opposition can use, But for now, it's too early to say which way things will develop. We just have to wait and see.
Luis, do you feel that there's a role? What do you feel is a role that Filipino Americans can play in helping to create change?
Well, I think because a lot of the um, fighting, to quote unquote, is now in cyberspace. Filipino Americans, just as with Filipinos in Manila and elsewhere in the Philippines, can be instrumental in using the internet the same way that the Marcos Duterte camp did, but in the opposite direction. So you don't necessarily have to be in Manila. You don't have to be in Mindanao. You can be in New Jersey, in Berlin, in Madrid, in New York, and still contribute to the drive for restoring and expanding the role of democracy in the Philippines. And I think what Arjun was pointing out is the danger right now is to undermine the 1987 Constitution. So if there's an outcry, not just within the Philippines, but on cyberspace among the global community of Filipinos, we might be able to forestall that, you know.
Arjun, do you want to close with something that you think is hopeful?
Okay. So again, just like what has already been mentioned by Professor Luis and Ma'am Loida, I'm very hopeful, or I'm very positive, optimistic toward this emergence of Ma'am Leni Robredo as a political figure, promising in the sense that in the past 6 years we saw her character, his compassion toward helping people, and of course, her resolve, in serving. He ran for president, knowing that she will lose. Eventually, it was a very difficult fight on her part, but she still decided to run. So to me, that is so selfless, and that is what we need right now. A political leader, a political figure who is not just interested to amass, get power, or to be in power. Larry Robredo is a person who is willing to empower us, to show us that we can do it. And in this past few months that she was campaigning, she was showing to us that we can do it. We can do something for our country. Volunteerism is there. Activism is also there. So that's why in the next 6 years, under this new administration of the second Marcos, okay, I'm really hoping that we will continue the support. I'm really hoping that we will still be behind her, because she cannot do this alone. She has empowered us. So now is the time that for us, even in the United States, other parts of the world, to also contribute. Okay, contribute in the sense that, you know, this is what Philippine democracy is all about. Then, I mean, this is a political rule wherein everyone is welcome to participate, and we are serving not for ourselves. We are serving for the betterment of all, especially the vulnerable. So again, that's what I would like to, you know, to say, especially for those of our, especially for those people who are watching, who are listening to our discussions, that, you know, we still have hope. Okay, don't lose hope, don't despair. Okay, as long as, I mean, we are here talking about, you know, our country, our love of country, I'm sure everything will be okay. So there.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. That was very inspiring, despite the scary times, not just for the Philippines, but for us here, as you spoke about, Luis. It's something we have to fight against, the disinformation and the strongman where we are too.
Right.
So thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to do this.
Thanks a lot,
Okay.
Nancy. Great. Let
Thank
us
you,
know.
Nancy.